Hey, Lance Egan here with this week's Fly Fishing Skill Builder. Today we're going to cover Euro Nymphing, rods, lines, leaders. Check it out.
Dude, that's a big round, bro.
All right, let's talk fly lines, Euro fly lines. Believe it or not, Euro Nymphing uses fly lines. I hear all the time that Euro Nymphing doesn't. That's just because you don't know what Euro Nymphing is. If you're not using a fly line, you're using a mono rig, not a Euro setup. Euro setups have to have a fly line. That said, you can fish lots of ways. I don't care how you do it. It's up to you. But if we're describing a Euro specific rig, it's using a fly line. Here's what they look like. They're very, very thin. They are from all manufacturers these days. We have them from Cortland, from Scientific Anglers, from Airflow, from Rio. Everybody makes them. Orvis, I left Orvis out as well. We have Euro lines from just about every manufacturer. All right. What makes a Euro line a Euro line? Number one, they're super thin. So could you take the end of an old weight forward and take the running line and use it? Sure, but it's way thicker than these. These are super, super thin lines. So the standard diameter is 0.022. Think if you took the thinnest line you had, if you have a one weight fly line and you cut it into like a fourth, that's about what this is. Super, super thin. Why do we want them thin? We want them to shoot through the guides very well. We want them to have very little sag. So sag both from your rod hand to the first guide and sag out the rod. So if you use a standard fly line, when you're holding your Euro rod up, the mass in that line is going to hang very vertical. A much thinner, lighter fly line will hang at a shallower angle and allow you to fish farther away while still manipulating, handling, taking up slack with a fly line, not holding monofilament. I use Euro lines in all of my rigs for Euro nymphing and for jigging streamers and for dry dropper rigs and so on. So why do I have all these lines up here? Well, they come in different diameters, they have different cores, they even have some different tapers. Most Euro lines are level. However, there are a few that are double tapers. The double tapers that we carry, some people will use them if they want to do a bit more dry fly fishing with their Euro setup. It works better than a level line. It does not work as well as putting a standard double taper or a standard weight forward line on your Euro rod. These are double tapers, but they're not a standard double taper. They're still very, very thin. Most Euro lines, as I mentioned, are level. Again, most common is 0.022. You can find them to 0.017. Like Cortland makes one of their monocore lines in a very, very thin option. That is not competition legal, but since most people couldn't care any less about fishing in a competition, that's a very good option if you want the absolute thinnest line. Otherwise, most of the standards from basically every manufacturer, 0.022. All right, what else? The core of the lines. The core can make a big difference in how the line acts. So I like to think of them in simple terms. You have braided core lines, you have low stretch lines, and you have monocore lines. The low stretch, let's see, the most common low stretch line is the Airflow Euro line. It has kind of like a GSP type of gel spun type of core. Very low stretch, very strong. A little harder to get the memory released from it, but it is a very sensitive line and a very durable line. Where most of the other lines, whether we're talking mono or braid core, have a couple of other options in them. So if we use Scientific Anglers as an option, as an example, we carry both the braided core and the mono core from them. They're the exact same diameter, they're both level. Why would you choose one or the other? Well, the mono core is a bit stiffer. I find that it pushes through the guides better. It does tend to have a bit more memory, especially in cold water. So the mono core, I tend to use more in the summer months when it's warmer weather, and the braided core more in the winter, just for the memory sake of things. Other considerations on the core is your attachment to leaders. So the different core materials can limit or enable you to do various line to leader connections. For instance, the most versatile is a braided core line. Whether it's a braided core from Cortland or a braided core from Rio or a braided core from SA, Orvis, doesn't matter, any brand. The braided cores, you can do a super glue splice, you can whip a micro loop into them, you can do a needle nail knot, you can do a standard nail knot. On the flip side, if you take a monocore line, monocore lines, you can strip the coating and do a blood knot to your leader so long as your leader and your fly line core material are similar diameters. If you're trying to take a micro leader and connect it to like a 12, 15 pound core, that knot won't link up very well. The monocore though, you can do a nail knot over the top of it. You can tie the core of the line right to a tippet ring and connect your leaders right to the tippet ring. There are options there. You could even tie a little micro loop in the end of this guy. There are some options. I find the most versatile all around, and the one we sell the most is a braided core. It doesn't have to be from SA, it could be from Cortland, could be from anybody, but the braided core lines, because of their multiple attachment options, are most popular. Outside of that, again, I like using a Euro fly line rather than mono. Why? Because I like managing fly line. I like casting fly line. When I'm taking up slack, I like to strip in fly line. When I'm setting the hook, I like to pinch fly line against the cork handle to get a good hook set. And I like fighting fish with the fly line. That way I'm not just handling monofilament. The mono tends to slip, it tends to have a bit more memory, etc., etc. I don't like the mono. You might. If you do, that's totally cool. I'm just expressing how I like to fish and what I call a Euro rig. So with that in mind, that's kind of the nuts and bolts on Euro fly lines. As you can see, we have lots of options. 024, 026, 017, 022, stuff for steelhead, stuff for micro setups, braided cores, gel spun cores, monocores, you name it, we have it. Check it out, flyfishfood.com. Let's talk Euro rods. What is a Euro rod? So a Euro rod is, generally speaking, a long rod, most of the time at least 9.5, usually 10 to 11 foot. Some even get a little longer than 11 feet. They're usually lightweight, both physical weight and line weight wise. So most Euro rods are 3 weights. They do make Euro rods from 1 to about 4 weights, and even up to 6s if you're doing steelhead or Euro nymphing for salmon or some sort of larger target species, or even really big browns when you're searching with larger streamers. Sometimes people use a 5 or a 6 in a longer rod. But generally, 2s, 3s, and 4s are most common, with 3 being kind of the workhorse Euro style rod. So outside of the line weights, what makes a Euro rod a Euro rod? Well, one, again, the length, very, very lightweight, physical weight. They're light because you're going to be holding a long rod up all day long, usually with a shoulder and arm elevated. You can, of course, do some of it with the arm tucked, but because you're going to hold it up all day, you don't want a heavy rod. Most of the less expensive Euro rods are a bit on the heavier side. I'd steer you away from those unless your budget is limiting you only to the least expensive. Next up, most Euro rods have a fighting butt, not all of them. Actually, my personal preference is I like them without a fighting butt. The fighting butt for me, I have several Euro rods that have the fighting butt. They're very usable. The thing I don't like is that the line wraps around the little fighting butt, where if the reel is right to the end, it doesn't have the tendency to wrap as much. That said, most of them do have the miniature fighting butt. Most Euro rods have a down-locking reel seat instead of an up-locking reel seat. Standard fly rods these days, most of them have an up-locking seat. That just means that you're pushing your reel down into the bottom of the rod. That changes the balance point of the reel. It also makes it so that you don't have as much gap between the back end of your reel and the bottom of the rod, so you can choke up on the rod and get a little more length out of it. Another characteristic of a Euro rod on most models is a lower guide placement. So this first stripping guide is in position to try and limit the amount of sag you have, the amount of space and then sag between your rod hand and that first guide, where most fly rods, 4-piece fly rods, the typical first guide is on that first bit of the second section of the rod. So Euro rods, again, most of them have that first guide a bit lower. And even amongst different manufacturers, they're all pretty similar these days as far as where they're placing that first guide to reduce the sag, let's say. It doesn't eliminate it. All right, what else? We want a rod that's quick recovery. Some of that has to do with the weight of the rod. A heavier rod, when it's flexed, takes longer to recover. A lighter weight rod goes from flex to straight quicker. Along with that, the fiber and the resins and the things they do to make the blanks very light and very responsive play a part here. So there again, a higher modulus fiber with the right resin mix can make a very quick recovery rod. We like that in Euro nymphing because a rod that dampens and recovers quickly is very accurate. They are also a bit on the softer side. With Euro systems, we're using long leaders and light tippet. So we need the long tips of the rod to be very flexible and have a lot of tippet protection. So they need to bend quite a bit, but they need to recover quite quickly. It's kind of a tall ask, actually. It's not a real easy thing to do to make a really good Euro rod. All right, what else? All these Euro rods are also fully capable of casting standard fly lines. So I use some of my own Euro rods. This particular one is a 10-foot 3-weight. You could take a regular weight forward or double taper 3-weight standard line, not a Euro line, but just a standard line, attach a regular leader to it, and fish dry flies with the long rod. A lot of tippet protection built in there, and a great rod for mending and manipulating line with the extra length. So they will work for standard techniques as well. It's not a very good choice if you're trying to use an indicator nymph system, because you're usually using an indicator that's too big, too much weight. A rod that's this light and this flexible is designed to load with just a couple of bead heads, not any extra weight. So could you use an indicator on these? Sure, but would you use it with a bounce rig or a drop shot rig? Probably not the best option unless you're getting one in a 5 or a 6 or something like that. They're very versatile. I use them for dry fly fishing. I use them for dry dropper fishing. I use them for nymphing. I use them for jigging streamers. Again, lots of tippet protection. Almost everybody makes them now. We have them from low price points all the way to the premium series of rods. You get what you pay for, like always in fly rods. As you go up in price, they're usually quicker recovery, they're usually lighter weight, they usually have a little better components, and so on. That said, again, if your budget doesn't allow, you can catch a lot of fish with a less expensive rod, and like never before, the value rods in the market are as good as they've ever been. That's a Euro rod in a nutshell. If you have more questions, drop them into the comments below, and let's check out leaders next. Okay, let's talk Euro leaders. These are much misunderstood, I think. This is a subject that's always evolving as well. So if you read an article 15 years ago, read a book from 15 years ago, those formulas, those ideas are probably obsolete at this point. Always changing, always adapting. Hard to stay current, but people end up trying lots of different things here with Euro leaders and kind of ending up in something that works really well for them. So with that in mind, let's just talk real quickly about what Euro leaders are. Euro leaders in a nutshell can be tapered, they can be level. They are available in both varieties. We carry some that are custom tied, that are tapered, some that are custom that are level. We carry some that are tapered from different companies. We carry some that are level, that are pre-made from different companies. All of these leaders, with the exception of this one here, terminate at a sider and a tippet ring, so they're ready out of the package to connect right to your Euro fly line. Add some tippet to the tippet ring, add your flies, and you're off and fishing. This particular one, the Umpqua Phantom X, the Euro leaders, these are actually tapered leader, sider, tippet ring, and then they even have the tippet based on what they put on here. So this one's 5X. They come in different diameters. You get a 4X, 5X, 6X, but they have the tippet and the droppers already built in. All you got to do is add flies. So depending on what you're looking for, we have pre-made options for you in different lengths and different diameters and so on and so forth. In a nutshell, for me, leaders are simple. If you've never tried Euro nymphing, try something thicker. Try something like the Advanced. Try something like the thicker version of my leader that I did with Umpqua. Try something like one of these tapered leaders that starts with a thicker leader butt, more like a traditional tapered leader that you'll be used to, with predictable delivery, with a little more strength in the turnover. They are easiest to learn to Euro nymph with. That said, once you kind of master handling those, you're accurate, you're comfortable, you're used to using that style of leader, then I would encourage you to keep getting thinner and thinner. Whether that means you buy a micro leader like this, you buy the 4X micro leader that I teamed up with from Umpqua, or you build your own micro leader using some leader butt material, that's totally fine, and there's steps between those. You don't have to go right from a 30-pound butt section on some of these pre-made leaders right to a 4X micro leader. You might step it down. If you're used to using one of these, maybe eliminate that and just run some straight 12-pound Amnesia or Maxima Chameleon, something like that. If you get used to that, drop it down to 8. If you get used to that, drop it down to 6. And then start thinking about diameters rather than pound test. For instance, this 8-pound is 010. That's basically 1X. Okay? So 1X is relatively thick. Again, relatively speaking, it's much thinner than a standard taper leader you'd use for dry fly fishing, but in a Euro system, on the thicker side of things. You can build your own leaders. That's what we use all these materials for. We use a lot of Maxima Chameleon, a lot of Amnesia, or my favorite product that's newer, this Umpqua Performex High Vis leader butt material. You can even just use heavier cider from each of these companies and use that as your leader. They're a little less stiff than this, so I tend to favor these materials. But the reason we're using these specific materials, a lot of people ask why Maxima Chameleon. It's hard to see, they'll say, because it's brown. We don't care about seeing it. We're going to see the cider that's on the end of it. The reason we use Maxima Chameleon or Amnesia or any of these other leader building materials is that they release memory very, very easily. You need it to be able to stretch and get straight. You don't want it to have lots of coils. That's why we're using those materials. If you favor something that's high vis, then maybe the Amnesia or some of these Performex materials that are high vis leader butts. Umpqua came out with this series just last year, so they have them in different diameters, and they also come in 3 different colors. They come in green, they come in orange, and they come in pink. Depending on what you see best, you could choose your favorite color and your favorite diameter. So again, in a nutshell, if you're starting Euro nymphing, tend towards thicker leader materials. If you're more of an intermediate, get kind of intermediate diameters. And if you're pretty experienced at it, you're mastering it, go thinner and thinner. Get all the way down to 4 or 5x for your leader material, and then thinner tippet from there. Okay, so the part of the leader that we're really focused on in a Euro rig is the cider. We have cider from all different companies, from Cortland, from Rio, from Scientific Anglers, from Hannock, from Fulling Mill. Everybody makes it. They come in different color options. Some are 2-tone, some are 1 color, some are triple tone. Most of them have at least 2 colors, like that Cortland's kind of a red and a yellow or chartreuse. You have to decide what you're going to see best and choose the color based on what you think you'll see the very best. One thing to consider on the cider, the thicker the cider is, the easier it is to see, but the more sag it has. Same with the leaders. If you're fishing a really thick leader, it's really easy to see, it's more accurate, but it has more sag, it has more mass, so it's not going to allow you to fish as far away and with as light of flies at distance. The thinner the leader is, if you use one of these little micro leaders, you can fish farthest away because it's super thin. It's harder to see. It's not as large diameter, but it has less wind resistance, it has less sag, so it's an advantage to use that so long as you can comfortably cast it with accuracy. And another thing to consider is a tippet ring. So tippet rings we put on the end of the cider. Again, the ciders are available in all kinds of colors, all kinds of diameters. Find a cider you can see, both in diameter and color. Add a little bit of that to the end of your leader. Then add a tippet ring. We add the tippet ring because the cider sometimes is relatively thick compared to the tippet we're going to add to it. Tippets in Euro nymphing range from, let's say, 3, 4x on the really heavy end of things, more commonly 5, 6, or 7x. I go through the most 5 and 6 personally for my own Euro nymphing. Fluorocarbon tippet is best there. It's a little bit more dense, it's a bit more abrasion resistant. Can you catch fish on nylon tippet? Absolutely you can. My preference is to do fluorocarbon. Tippet rings are a necessity. Again, think about colors you can see. Lengthwise, I didn't talk a lot about that. The longer you make the leader, the harder it is to control, the less line you're going to use. I like to use my leaders around double the length of the rod. Most of my Euro leaders, total length from point fly to my Euro fly line is in the neighborhood of 18 to 24 feet, somewhere in that range. Most commonly, I take some of this stuff, or I get one of these 14-foot micro leaders. I attach that directly to my Euro fly line, usually with a needle nail knot. Then to the tippet ring, I add some 5x tippet or 6x tippet, usually 4 to 6 feet of that. Do a triple surgeon's knot, leave a tag, then put your a couple more feet of tippet on there to your terminal end and where you put your point fly. So you adapt length of tippet based on the conditions, but you leave your leader about the same. Usually, again, as just a general rule of thumb, double the length of the rod should get you in business. Otherwise, again, don't forget to check us out online. We have all these products available there. If I didn't cover something that you're interested in, maybe check out our Modern Nymphing Masterclass that myself and Gilbert Rowley and Devin Olson put together, modernnymphingmasterclass.com. It has lots about leaders, lots about Euro nymphing, and other techniques as well. Otherwise, check all these out online, and don't forget to like and subscribe.